By the 18th of December 1944, the spearhead of the famous Kampfgruppe Piper under the command of Joachim Piper had arrived at Trois-Ponts. Piper's Panthers ran into a 57mm anti-tank gun before they could roll on towards the bridge over the Amblève River. However, the Americans blew up the bridge at 10:30 am, forcing the Germans to find a crossing elsewhere. The main threat may have subsided, but the battle for Trois-Ponts was far from over. Later that day, the bridge over the Sambre River was also blown after contact with German panzers on the heights to the east of the village had been established. With all bridges blown, no German armour could enter the town. The following day was one of anxiety and uncertainty for the few American engineers holding the town. However, help was on its way in the form of the 82nd Airborne Division. The All-American Division was still at Suippes, France, when the Germans launched their Ardennes offensive. Early in the morning of the 18th of December 1944, the division of Major General James Gavin mounted the trucks and headed for Belgium. The division was still recovering from the difficult campaign in the Netherlands earlier that year, but the new developments in the Ardennes required both the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions to be brought back into the front line. The All-American Division arrived in the vicinity of Verbeumont on the 19th of December. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment was put up north, linking them with the 30th Infantry Division. The 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment was put at Trois-Ponts and Grand-Alleux, with the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment to their right. The 2nd Battalion 505th under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin van der Voort was put at Trois-Ponts. By 1 PM the command post was set up at the same building as C Company of the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion, which had been defending the town for a few days. Colonel Ekman, in command of the 505th, also ordered a bridgehead across the Sambre River upon the heights to the east. The 110 men strong E Company was chosen for the task. But in order to get the men across, a platoon of B Company 307th Airborne Engineer Battalion was ordered to fix the blown bridge to allow light vehicles and infantry to cross the Sambre River. At 3 PM, E Company under the command of Lieutenant William Meador was sent across the river. They were supported by two jeep-towed 57mm anti-tank guns of the 80th Airborne AA Battalion. A half an hour later, the paratroopers had reached a roadblock set up by C Company of the 51st Engineer Combat Battalion. Bazooka teams were sent out to create ambush positions and the paratroopers dug in. Meador ordered Lieutenant Jack Bailey's 1st platoon to dig in on the right, while Lieutenant Wallace's 2nd platoon would dig in on the left. Lieutenant Howard Jensen's 3rd platoon was kept in reserve at the company HQ. Mines were put up on the road and defences were improved. Company E of the 505th was ready to meet the Germans. Just before 8 o'clock in the evening, half-tracks of the SS Panzeraufklärungsabteilung 1 were spotted on the main roads through the forest. The initial encounter came to a close as one of the German half-tracks hit a mine and blew up. Later that night, a second half-track would be knocked out thanks to a bazooka team. Earlier that day, Sherman tanks of Task Force Lovelady of the 3rd Armoured Division had cut Piper's supply route at Quelle, which caused a severe threat to the German 1st SS Panzer Division. The appearance of the 82nd Airborne at the heights overlooking Trois-Ponts was also alarming, as the area was seen as being in the German rear. In order to stem the new threat, Kampfgruppe Hansen, which mainly consisted of SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 1, was ordered up towards Petit-Spey. By the morning of the 21st, the first elements of Hansen's Kampfgruppe had reached Vannes. A patrol of Company E was sent out towards Isaumont. They encountered a couple of vehicles and a few Germans at a house and opened fire. Both vehicles took off in a hurry and soon German artillery came crashing down along the house. The Germans at Petit-Spey were alarmed and they quickly sent out parties towards the entrenched paratroopers of E Company. By 9:45 am, Lieutenant Colonel van der Voort informed Colonel Ekman, the regimental commander, that E Company was in contact with the Germans. The 4th Company SS Panzeraufklärungsabteilung 1 of SS Obersturmführer Wegner and personnel of the 5th Battery SS Panzerartillerieregiment 1 slowly but surely gained the upper hand with 75mm and 20mm half-tracks. The brunt of the German attack was borne by Lieutenant John Wallace's 2nd platoon. The Germans soon got round the 2nd platoon and the 1st platoon of Lieutenant Bailey soon fired into the flanks of the advancing Aufklärer and artillerymen. Lieutenant Meador, in command of E Company, called up 81mm mortar fire, which promptly slowed down the German advance. By 10:30 am, Meador noticed that the Germans were attacking on the wide front, and so he also ordered up his 3rd platoon. He put Jensen's platoon to the right of 1st platoon to aid in enfilading the attackers. The bazooka section was overwhelmed and the survivors of the 8-man section were forced to surrender. Evidence seemed to point in the direction that they were murdered shortly after being captured by a few frenzied souvenir seekers under SS Sturmbannführer Gustav Knittel. By 10 AM, the staunch American presence at Trois-Ponts was reported to Kampfgruppe Hansen, who was still organizing his men at Vannes. Hansen promptly sent out his 2nd Battalion SS Panzergrenadier Regiment 1 of SS Hauptsturmführer Sepp Unterkoffler. More and more Germans were sighted, and the initial reports of one German company opposing E Company were soon altered. Reinforcements in the form of a platoon of F Company were sent across the Somme River to help stem the German attack. By 12:30 PM, Van der Voort fully committed Lieutenant Harold Case's Company F. They were put on the right flank of Medour. The situation on the left, however, was deteriorating. With the arrival of SS Hauptsturmführer Unterkoffler's Panzergrenadiers, the 2nd platoon of E Company was fighting against overwhelming odds. The fight soon shifted to a vicious hand-to-hand battle. As one of the American platoons counterattacked, the situation was temporarily restored. However, with more and more sightings of Germans at Desaumont, Lieutenant Colonel Ira Swift, the Assistant Divisional Commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, advised the 2nd Battalion to withdraw off of the heights over Trois-Ponts. The time was 1 PM, casualties were already high, but perhaps the most difficult action was still to come. As the Germans attacked again, this time in the centre of the defences, Van der Voort sent D Company of Lieutenant Joe Meyer across the river. One of the 57mm anti-tank guns had been knocked out, and the Germans finally gained the upper hand. Several German parties got round the defences and started to pour small arms fire into Trois-Ponts. Around 4 PM, the retreat was in full swing. Company F of Lieutenant Case came out relatively unscathed, but E Company was only a mere shadow of its former self. Of the 110 men that started the day, only 40 to 50 men returned. The Germans, acknowledging that the paratroopers were on the back foot, shifted their attack to the south. Nonetheless, several German parties followed closely behind the retreating Company E, which was almost continuously fired upon. 2 members of the 80th Airborne AA Battalion would be awarded with the Distinguished Service Cross for their actions during the withdrawal. The battalion would lose 3 jeeps and 3 anti-tank guns, one of which was knocked out. 5 men were also killed. First Lieutenant Jack Verdick would be posthumously awarded with the DSC for refusing to be driven from his gun. When all crew members had become casualties, Verdick took over the gun, covering the withdrawal for the retreating paratroopers until he too was killed. Corporal Stokes Taylor was the other DSC recipient of the battalion. He was also posthumously awarded with the medal. When Taylor's gun was put out of action, he grabbed the light machine gun and also covered the withdrawal of his fellow paratroopers until the Germans overwhelmed his position and he was seen to be hit. By 4:30 PM, all men were back across the river, and half an hour later the bridge was blown for a second time. Easy Company had lost half of its strength, and also the 80th Airborne Anti-Air Battalion had suffered terrible losses, losing 3 of its guns and 5 men killed. The Americans had been driven off of the high grounds east of Trois-Ponts, but thanks to both the presence of the 2nd Battalion 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment at Trois-Ponts and the Sherman tanks of Task Force Lovelady, the Germans were forced to alter their plans and send Kampfgruppe Hansen up towards the Somme River to try and liberate the entrapped Kampfgruppe Piper at La Glaise. This was the Ace Destroyer. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, you can always subscribe to the channel and like the video if you want to see more. I hope to catch you in another video. Cheers!